Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart Podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 45th episode, we're going to have another Jeffisode. And that means there's no guest. It's just a man and his microphone. And I'm coming at you from an Airbnb in Lisbon, Portugal. Now, if you don't like these Jeffisodes, which is the term that a few listeners have started to affectionately call them, or at least I assume it's affection. But then again, I'm the egomaniac who names everything with Jeff in front of it. If you don't like these episodes, then you can hold out until our next interview with a marketing professional, which is going to come out in about 2 weeks. But it sounds like most of you enjoy these Jeffisodes because I got a ton of positive feedback on episode 43. I actually got more responses to that one episode than any other episode that we've published on the Jeffalytics podcast. So I figured, why not do it again? Now, our last Jeffisode talked about my reflections on the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. And it's funny because in the month since I recorded that episode, so much of this has evolved. And guess what? It was a lot of ups and downs. And actually, it almost immediately after the episode was published, I had a down. I was figuratively punched in the face by entrepreneurship, and that happened to me for about a week straight. I was like in a full Nelson, and they just kept on punching me in the face, entrepreneurship. I was beaten, I was bloodied, and I really wanted to hit the panic button and just stop. I was just like, why did I choose to be an entrepreneur? What's wrong with me? But instead, I was like, I could either get down, I could get depressed about this thing, or I can divert my energy to something else, to something that was more positive, because there were a lot of cool things that were happening. So for example, to snap me out of the funk, I flew up to New York and I recorded a class with Skillshare. Now, Skillshare, they're an online learning company with all these awesome courses teaching everything from how to use Adobe Illustrator and be creative, all the way to this new business catalog they're developing. And they said they want me to be one of the flagships of their business catalog, and they want me to talk about Google Analytics. And it's going to be cool because it's going to go live, the class that I recorded with them, to 2 million people in the middle of May. And so basically, I was there for a whole day of shooting, but it's an hour to an hour and a half of actual content. And honestly, this is the best course that I've created to date, and it's going to be well worth the monthly subscription to Skillshare. I think it's something like $12 a month. So if you do want to hear my voice or see me on camera, you should subscribe to Skillshare and check it out. It's pretty cool. And then literally when I got done filming, I hopped in a cab and headed to the airport to fly to Italy. And so that night I flew to Italy overnight, and I was going to Italy for both work and play. Now the work part was me giving a workshop and speaking at the AdWorld Experience in Bologna, which was an amazing time. And beyond that, there was a lot of play as well, which I'm not going to get into because the play part is still a work in progress. I'm still working on the play part right now. And beyond that, we launched a promo for my PPC course on AppSumo last week, and it went gangbusters. I honestly didn't believe the response that came in. It basically did twice as well as the promotions that we ran last year, or not quite twice as well, but we brought in 3,000 new students to my PPC course. And anytime you can get 3,000 people to put down money to say they're interested in something you have to do, it definitely can put wind back in your sails. It's great to see, you can get down about one or two bad things happening, but when 3,000 people vote with their dollars, it makes you feel pretty darn good. And then this week, I've been writing a course on Google Analytics for the Online Marketing Institute, and that's coming together nicely as well. Oh, and while I was writing the episode notes for this one, I just got named one of the top 21 Google Analytics blogs as well. Now, I haven't looked at the website and really gone into detail on it, but, I'd put that honor on my license plate if I had a car. And as you can see, a lot has happened since we last talked, so maybe it does make sense to do these updates once a month or so. Maybe I'll even get down to the point where we're doing it once a week and throwing it onto a separate podcast feed entirely for those of you who like this. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. If you do like it, let me know so I know what I'm doing, because I'm just a guy in a microphone, and I want to hear your feedback to see where we should take this thing and if you like these episodes. But enough about me. It's time to get to our interview with... Can you hear that drum roll? Me! It's me again. You're stuck with me, whether you like it or not. This interview is just me talking the entire time. We don't have an interview. But we do have a question from a listener. So I'm going to introduce our first ever Jumpstart Podcast listener question. Now this question comes from Grant, who's actually a friend of mine. I didn't ask him to submit a question. He did this on his own, but he's a friend of mine from Minnesota and an all-around awesome dude. He had heard Lesson 43, and he wanted more. He wanted more of this type of content. Now, before we get to Grant's question, if you want to ask a question or give me a topic for a future Jeffisode, you should have no problem reaching me. Just go to your web browser, type in Jeff, and then Google will autocomplete the rest because I've pretty much dominated the world around typing Jeff into a web browser. So here's Grant's comment. Now notice the flattery at the beginning. This will get you everywhere. Grant says, "Hey Jeff, just wanted to let you know that I really enjoyed the latest podcast. The honesty of the ups and downs of your experience made for a great listen. Keep it up. I'd love to hear more about your honest thoughts and experiences around building yourself into a thought leader, going from getting pitches rejected to speak at conferences to keynoting at major events. I think it'd be great for you to share more about that and how you go about building your personal brand, especially through speaking. Hope all else is well, my friend." Oh, Grant, you are too kind. But I do love this question. And I actually recorded a video for you on top of a mountain in Italy with my response. As one does when they receive questions from their podcast listeners. You just go to the top of a mountain and record a response. But it actually didn't turn out very well. My battery died in the middle of recording and I didn't know it. So I think I got only half of the response recorded. So we're going to do it here on a real microphone, not on location. But I will include a screen grab of the video in our show notes just so you can see that I'm not lying to you. Okay, this preamble might be longer than my actual response to you, Grant, but I'm still hoping that none of you fall off of your treadmill waiting for me to get to this response. Yes, I'm imagining that all of my listeners are on a treadmill right now, listening to my voice and deciding how fast they're going to run based on how fast I talk. And speaking of treadmills, I am really bad at converting miles to kilometers. So I thought that I was running super fast the other day when I hit 10 kilometers per hour. I'm like, man, I'm a freaking rock star. But it turns out that I shouldn't quit my day job because that's actually not that fast at all. Okay, so let's answer your question, Grant. I'm going to answer this question in the form of a top 10 list because that's what we did last time and that's what seemed to give you the positive vibes. But I am going to make an emphasis on this list about how speaking plays into the game of personal branding. Now, the first one, it takes a long time to become an overnight success. This is a quote that I didn't invent. And actually, there might be specific versions of this quote. Anybody who's listening can tell me who actually made this quote. But what people always see is they see the tip of the iceberg that, something emerges from the bottom of the ocean. And they think that it's just like it's always been there or it deserves to be there. And what they don't see is the years and years and years of struggle that things take in order to break to the surface. And so for anybody out there that you see who's super successful, you're seeing them when they've been doing this for several years, and we think that that's how we should be on day one. And actually, I think I said this in our last episode, don't compare your day one to somebody else's day number 1,000. I think that's a key to this whole thing, is don't compare yourself to where people are now. Know that they had to go through a long process to get there. The other thing is you can't ever recreate their conditions. And maybe I'm repeating myself the last time, but it's worth repeating. You can never recreate somebody's conditions. So if you want to be the next Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, and you want to keynote stuff and you want to be a YouTube star, you're not going to be able to recreate what he did because he had a lot of time under the surface just getting practice on this thing, and then he has years of momentum built up. So don't try to recreate somebody's success, but understand that they took a long time to become an overnight success. It takes a long time to get there. And with that, number two, the journey is actually the destination. That's the cool part about this thing. The journey you take to get to where you're going is what I would consider to be the destination. So what do I mean by that? It's probably more exciting to get that first gig, speaking gig. Anytime that somebody has you come to their conference and speak or do a workshop or even write a guest blog post somewhere, getting that first gig is super exciting. Actually, there's probably nothing more exciting than getting that first break or leveling up with your breaks, multiplying, getting new challenges. That's the fun part. I think I remember my first speaking gig was for a nonprofits, and it was at a coffee shop, and 5 people showed up, and it was me sitting down at a table, and then everybody else was sort of right next to me. So I wasn't even facing a crowd. It was actually just sitting around a round table. And so I didn't even have people looking at me. I had people looking at my side, which is really awkward. I don't really do well. I don't have a great side profile. And so that's funny, but that was cool. And then every time after that, it was all about leveling up, just getting the next challenge, the next gig. And that was cool. And so I got the excitement, I got the rush whenever I had the next level or whenever the next thing came up, that was the best part about it all. Now, if you're at the point where you're going to auditoriums with tens of thousands of people, getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars per speech, that is another level you can get to. But at that point, it's just a job. And I've been around a lot of people. We've organized conferences. I've had keynote speakers that we've paid quite a bit of money to come into our conference. And they're all the same. It's funny. They're all the same. None of them seem happy. They don't seem like they're having fun at this at all. They'll actually not even participate in the conference. They'll show up and they'll be, they'll fly their helicopter in. Seriously, we had a guy fly his helicopter in and have a private driver from the private airport to our conference. Showed up 10 minutes before their speech, go on stage, do the same speech that they've done 100 times that year, collect their paycheck, because of course they want to get paid up front because they've learned to get the money as quickly as they can, and then they're off in their private helicopter to the next thing. Like, a lot of these people don't even, they sleep in their bed every night. That's like their rider. It's like they'll come in for a 1 hour speech from halfway across the country as long as they can sleep in their own bed. Now, that's not a bad gig if you can get those, but is that really what you want to do? So I think for those people, it's not nearly as fun because they've reached the destination. The journey, the fun, all that comes in the build up to that piece. And that's how I find it as well. Every time I get invited to something that's a newer challenge or a little bit bigger, I get excited. And it's, and you can stay at a level for a while. It does sort of get boring to do the same thing over and over again, but be careful about wishing to get all the way to the top, because I have not seen many people who are happy at the top. And obviously that's just my perception of seeing them for the 10 minutes before their speech and the 5 minutes afterwards when they decide to stick around. But it seems like a job to them, seems like a grind. So even being on top of the world can be a grind for people. Number 3, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. It's like isn't that a line from Metallica, King Nothing? It is. I mean, it's part of that song. It makes me think of that, but that's it, right? Be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. Like I went through, and this is advice to myself, to my former self, actually, because I thought that speaking was going to be this interesting springboard to allow me to travel the world and make money doing it. And I thought that was the easiest way if you can get paid a bunch of money per speech. But it turns out that it's not really that easy unless you want to speak to certain crowds that you don't really care about, or the people who have money, which the people who have money are generally like educational institutions or user groups or big companies that can do that. And so if you want to go out and speak and get paid for it, it's not nearly as glamorous as it seems, I guess, is my point on this one. Is be careful for that, because you might just find yourself flying coach, or maybe if you're good enough, business class, to collect a paycheck all across the country. You might do 200 gigs a year in order to make your money. Is that how you want to make your money? Is that really what the goal is here? I've heard that you can make a good amount of money if you write a book, and that's going to be one of our upcoming tips. But basically, if I wanted to go to the point where I was making a ton of money speaking, it's a grind, just like anything else. To turn things that are a hobby or something that sounds really cool into a profession, all the fun comes out of it. Even like becoming a professional photographer. I'll tell you that story at point number 6, but I was around a bunch of professional photographers and none of them seemed like they were having fun. And that happened just the other day. Number 4, be consistent. So if you are going to do this thing, try to be consistent in what you deliver. Deliver a consistent presentation. Don't try to reinvent the wheel each time. Be consistent with how you position yourself. Be consistent with what you say yes to and what you say no to. Just be consistent with this whole process. I think that a lot of people have aspirations and the talent to become a big star or a big voice in the world. But the ones who have the biggest following are the ones who are consistent. And this is not just a marketing thing. This is everywhere. In marketing, Rand Fishkin, Whiteboard Friday, every Friday for the last 10 years. Consistent. That's part of a key to his charm and his ability to become Rand Fishkin. In the photography world, this guy named Trey Ratcliffe, he's very consistent in publishing. In the online blogosphere, Seth Godin, hero of mine, he's consistent. Even like the video game YouTubers and stuff like that, YouTube success people, Casey Neistat, PewDiePie, I think I'm saying that right. These people are just consistent. That's the thing. Your first 1,000 days of doing this are going to be crap, So you need to be consistent, and you need to be persistent. Even more important, you need to be persistent in going after this thing, because eventually your second 1,000 days are going to be better, and then eventually it just becomes a habit. So you need to be persistent. I would say to anybody, if you're not prepared, if you're looking to do something and you see the people who are on top, the ones who are successful, and you see how much work they've put in, if you're not willing to see yourself putting in that work 5 years from now, then you have to either temper your expectations or go do something else. I would actually say tempering expectations is probably more realistic than just doing something else entirely. But what I mean by that is if you see Seth Godin getting paid $100,000 for a keynote and being Seth Godin and doing Seth Godin stuff, and you don't realize that he did it for the last 20 years, then you're never going to be at his level if you do it for 2 weeks and then you take 2 months off. I'm guilty of this as well, and I think that's all that this comes down to. The people who have the highest following, they've been doing it for a long time. I think we touched on that in our last episode as well. Number 5, this is one that's actually a speaking tip. Getting good with other people who have speaking gigs. So people who who are on the conference speaking circuit, who get the gigs that you look for, talk to them and say, hey, how did you get in there? Who do you know? How do I get to be at this point where I can join the speaking circuit as well? Is exactly what I did. I remember Angie Schottmuller, who was on the podcast and is an awesome marketer. I remember Josh Broughton and I, we took her to a happy hour and we just like, hey, how do we get speaking gigs? We were both interested in getting speaking gigs, and she gave us this whole, just so generous with her time. She gave us this whole checklist of things to do, gave us a list of all the conferences coming up. She had actually had a spreadsheet. She gave us all this really amazing information, and then even said, hey, if you're going to pitch a conference, send it to me first, and I'll tell you if it's good or bad or not. And then also she said, if I find that any conferences need speakers, I'll get you on the bill, which is amazing. Like, I can't even tell you how cool it was to have that offer, but she delivered on it too. I mean, everything she said she'd do, she did. She got me my first SES, I think it was still called SES back then, SES conference gig. It was like in the back room at SES Toronto. Actually, it was in a basement, and there's like 6 people there. But hey, I got my first speaking gig, like my first major one. It was international, and that set the tone for many more things that I could do moving on. So getting good with other speakers who have the gigs that you want and who are getting invited to things, and have them help you out. Now, don't expect too much. I mean, these are busy people. These are people who, don't ask for too much, don't expect too much, but you might find out that if you have a friend who's in that area, they're willing to help you out. Angie was really tremendous in that way for me, really helped me out. The other thing that Angie told me, and this is point number 6, is get in good with the organizers. So getting in good with the speakers is one thing, but getting in good with the organizers makes all the difference in the world. So find out who's organizing these conferences and get to know them. Form a relationship. I was in Bologna just 2 weeks ago now, and it was all because of a relationship I struck up with John Paulo, who is the organizer of AdWorld Experience Conference. I reached out to him and said, hey, your conference looks cool. Can I stop by? And I stopped by last year. I didn't have a speaking slot. I just was like, hey, I'd like to go to Bologna. So I came and met him, and the rest is history. I was on the stage on their bill the next year, and so I got in good with him. I've been to several continents with Zoli from the Super Week conference, and Zoli invites me to everywhere that he goes because we have fun together, and we've struck up a relationship. I get into Hero Conference because I have great friends at Hannapin Marketing and the Hero Conference circuit, the PPC Hero folks. I actually had Jeff Allen on the podcast not too long ago. And so these relationships go a long way. So almost every gig that I get now, it's based on building relationships, and getting one speaking gig leads to another. I'm a relationship guy as much as I can, and it's not because I am doing it for an ulterior motive. I just genuinely, these people are pretty awesome. Like, I've organized conferences myself in Minneapolis, and so I can understand what they're going through. I can make their life easier by taking care of myself, by not being a diva and this whole thing. And so basically, you can get in good at the organizers by just being not a complete and total D-bag. Now, that's going to be my bonus tip at the end, is don't be a D-bag. That's like how I operate life in general. But just keep in mind, you can get in good with organizers and a lot of cool things can happen. Now, let me give you an example of that. I have a good friend in Minneapolis as well, Ted Kozlowski, and he's awesome. He's a great speaker. He knows more about AdWords than anybody I've ever met. And I said, hey, Gianpaolo, I see we're coming to Bologna. I think you should really get Ted on your bill. And so he said, okay, let me research Ted. Let me talk to him. And suddenly Ted's coming to Italy with me. And so we had a good time hanging out in Italy. We had a lot of time together because Ted was qualified to speak, and I helped him get into the speaking bill. And so that's how it works, is you just develop these relationships, and everything is just easier when you have relationships in place. So again, it's a slow build. Most organizers organize one conference a year. And so if you want to get on a speaking gig for 2017, the best time to start working on that 2017 gig is in 2015. Because basically you need to do something good in 2015 to get invited to something in 2016. And then in 2016, the organizer of the 2017 conference needs to see you, hear you, understand what you delivered and what you're capable of, and they'll bring you on stage in 2017. So the best time to get a 2017 gig was in 2015. And so if you want to do stuff in 2019, you better start working at it now, getting that foot in the door, getting as much as you can. Now, I would say speaking is not an end-all, be-all. So like just because you want to do this stuff doesn't mean that it's going to make you satisfied in anything. I mean, speaking is sort of a means to an ends for a lot of people. So make sure you have your expectations in place with what you're going to get from speaking. Now, this is, let's call this a bonus tip because I don't have it written down. But basically, the point of speaking is personal satisfaction. I think an outcome of speaking is often lead generation for agencies or service providers. It's conquering a fear, like a fear of public speaking or a fear of nobody caring what you have to say or something like that. Think about what your objectives are for public speaking, and then think about what value you're actually going to get out of it. So I went into speaking at first because I thought that it would be great for lead gen for my agency. And it's okay. I wouldn't say that it's great for lead gen. It's just okay. You might find one client lead per conference, or maybe a couple of them, depending on what you're talking about. But you're not going to have 1,000 people just banging down your door to work with you. So it has to be something more than that. Is it building a brand? Is it relationships? The biggest reason why I like speaking now is because I can make more progress in 10 minutes meeting somebody in person than I could in 10 years of online relationships. That's the main reason. And what I mean by that is a lot of our podcast guests, a lot of people that we have in this podcast, I've met in conferences in person and talked to them and just made a lot of progress in a friendship and a relationship. It just is so much more real when you can meet somebody in person. So that's the main reason why I do this, is to meet people and to put myself out there. And also the hallway conversations, the happy hours, all that stuff. You get so many insights into how things work and so much more confidentiality and just candidness with people when they're live in person than you ever could in an email. People are guarded in their online conversations, rightfully so. They should be. I think everybody should be super guarded in an online conversation, but the guards go way down when there's a couple cocktails flowing, or there's a glass of wine, or even if you're just in an area where you're trapped with somebody, things go really fast. And so that's the thing that excites me the most about conferences. I think I have 5 or 6 more prospective podcast guests just from that conference in Bologna. And so that's really the value I get out of this, is just meeting people and talking. And a lot of times it leads to something new. It leads to new opportunities as well. And so just be clear about your objectives. That's a bonus, this thing. That actually probably should have been number 1, is to be clear about your objectives. But yeah, whatever. I don't care. This is a top 10 list. It's going to actually have 12 points at this juncture. Number 7, everything is relative. Now, here's a story that is nuts. So I land in Lisbon on last Thursday night at like midnight. The flight's delayed by a couple hours. I'm grumpy, not in a good mood. And I look at my email because obviously have your phone turned off during the flight. Look at my email and it says, come join me in Lisbon on Sunday night. And an email is from this guy named Trey Ratcliffe. And Trey Ratcliffe is a photographer. Google him. He's the most downloaded photographer in the internet. So his pictures have been viewed more than any other photographer in the history of the internet. And he was big on Google Plus. I've bought his videos. I've watched his HDR tutorials. I've bought his software that he produces. I've bought a lot of his stuff. I'm sort of a fan of this guy. And he's going to be in Lisbon on Sunday night. So 2 days after I arrive, this guy's going to be there. And so I'm like, holy cow, this is pretty cool. And it's a photo walk. So you bring your camera and you walk through the city of Lisbon and take photos of stuff. And I'm thinking, this guy's pretty popular. I wonder how many people he can get. And there's like a Facebook group, and it's a free thing, the photo walk. And he gets 150 people that say they're going to it. And I'd say about 100 people showed up. Like in a random city with 3 days notice, he got 100 people to show up at this thing. And that's pretty nuts, right? That in any city in the world, this guy potentially can have hundreds of people show up on short notice. So I was fascinated by that. And I was like, man, this guy's so big, I don't think I'll even be able to say hi to this guy or, whatever. And this is one of those stories that I'd tell you more if I saw you in person, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I didn't even want to talk to him, but I bought tickets to the VIP party afterwards, which anytime you buy tickets to a VIP party, it's not really a VIP party. It's just marketing, right? You're not a VIP if you have to pay for it. But anyway, so I go to the party, and my wife's like, hey, are you going to talk to this guy? And I was like, nah, I don't really want to bother him. And there's only like 20 people at this after party at this point. And so it's pretty intimate. It's not like it's hard to approach him. She's like, just do it. And I was like, all right. I had to finish my drink. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go talk to this guy. So I go talk to him, and I'm like, hey, I'm Jeff, blah, blah, blah. I have taken your courses. I was a member of your photography criticism community. And I do online courses, travel the world, gave him the little elevator pitch. And he's like, oh, that's cool, Jeff. You should talk to my business partner. We need help with our online courses. You should help us market them. And I was like, what? This is cool. And I don't think much of it. But then eventually he gets whisked away as the star of the party does. And later on, he's like talking to my wife about me. He's like, hey, are you Jeff's wife? And like asking her all these questions and stuff like that. And then later on we start talking. Like, turns out we have a lot in common. We have like a 30 or 40 minute conversation just about everything, just about life in general. And it was sort of crazy to think that. Now, this is a story, I don't really know where my point was, but I wrote down everything is relative. Basically, here's what I learned from meeting Trey Ratcliffe, this guy. One is he's normal-ish. I mean, nobody's really normal when they get to be that big, but he's got a good head on himself, and he's not completely aloof. He's really in the present, so he like remembers people's names, which is cool, remembers details, really passionate about what he does, and sort of turned it into this thing where he can go, I think he said he's on the road 7 months a year shooting photography all over the world. He has sponsors. He has a tour bus. We'll call it a tour bus. He's doing a photo tour all throughout Europe this summer. And he's able to do all this stuff because he got really good. He was consistent in what he did. He built his brand. He found a way to handle the delivery of his product, which his product is photography. He did all these things. He put himself out there and gave away all of his photos and everything basically for free. He gave joy to people for free. And then eventually he went through and monetized it to the point where he's able to sell his courses and make a good living. I mean, he makes a great living doing photography, way more than you can even imagine, than I can even imagine he makes off of doing this. But also that if he sends an email to somebody anywhere in the world, he can get 100 people to show up and take photos with him. So it's like, how did that guy get to that point? And this is that whole thing of like reverse engineering and looking where people are at and then making that decision. Do you want to be at that level? Do you want to, if I said, hey, I'm in Lisbon, who wants to come and talk about analytics? Would I get one person to show up? What's your goal and what are you looking to do? And then how has anybody else done this? And then what can you get out of it? So I don't know if this, I just wanted to tell this story because it's just random. Like I wouldn't say idolizing, but following this guy, like everything he does for the last 5 years. And I learned photography from him and I've watched his videos and everything. And then suddenly we're in person and he's just like a normal dude. Like we talk for 30 plus minutes and he remembers my name. That was pretty cool. almost as cool as the time that I met Mark Cuban and did the same thing. Talked to him for about 40 minutes, and just a regular dude. That's why I love Mark Cuban so much too. Anyways, this might just be a humble brag saying like, I can't believe I met this guy and I was there, but let's just move on to the next point, because this is a Jeff-isode and I get to make the rules up. So that's a story. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Number 8, try to win by being yourself, because it makes things so much more enjoyable in the end. Now, this is something I have to remind myself, because there's been a lot of times where I tried to be exact spitting image of somebody who I idolized and try to do what they did in order to think that that was the only way to do something. And it's so painful when you can't be yourself. So for example, when I was writing on my travel blog a lot, I didn't swear. I didn't have my sarcastic tone that I normally do. I wasn't being my own personality. Even when I go to speaking gigs, I wouldn't put humor into speaking gigs, because I was like, there should be no humor in analytics, or, there should be you shouldn't be doing that. These people are paying money to see you, not to hear your jokes. And I basically took my personality out of a lot of things that I did, writing wise, presenting wise. A lot of times I just didn't put my sense of humor into things. And I always try to, I like to have a sense of humor. I like to find the humor in everything. And so that's hard, because if you can't be yourself, then when you do turn on yourself, well, first of all, if you don't act like yourself, you're not genuine, and you're not going to get a huge audience, because people can see through that. You seem just stiff. And so I try to loosen it up. But once you've gone one direction, loosening it up is sort of tough, right? Because you're sort of changing your persona. Now, you might find people find you more endearing or like you more, but you might find the opposite happens. People are like, oh, this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for Jeff to do an episode by himself. I signed up for interviews. And that's why I'm thinking about switching this to a different feed, because this is me. This is who I am. This is what I'm going through. And we got some positive reactions from it. That's why I'm going to keep on doing it. But there are people who are going to be like, hey, Jeff, stop doing episodes by yourself. All I want is interviews. And so the answer to that is, all right, I'll do both, and I'll do them in different episodes, but this is who I am. I like to do things. I have a personality. I like to find the humor in things. And so I don't want that to go away, but it's a constant reminder, because there are a lot of times where I set out to do something and I'm not myself. And it's like, well, that's sort of boring in the end of it. So be yourself as much as you can. And if you're going to win being yourself, because it's way more fun than having to adjust to who you really are in the back end. And you know what? It took me a long time to figure that out. And so hopefully somebody else can learn from that before they do a lot of lost efforts in another way. Number 9, this is an easy one. If you want to get a lot of speaking gigs, particularly speaking gigs, write a book. Write a book that gets a lot of people to read it, and you will get invited to do things, and you can charge a lot of money for your speech. Number 10, act like who you are. So here's how I did it. So I wrote that I'm a speaker in my LinkedIn bio. I SEO'd myself in my own website. I positioned myself as an expert. And if you put Google Analytics speaker, if you search for that on Google, my site should show up number 1. And so I get inquiries all the time because somebody's looking for a Google Analytics speaker. I position myself as that. I put it in my slide shares. I put a lot of materials out there, and I get inquiries all the time. People say, Skillshare, this large organization, they said, hey, when we search for Google Analytics trainer or teacher or speaker, the only person that showed up was you. You're the only one that exists, so you're our number 1 choice. And so a lot of times when I come into these things, I'm somebody's number 1 choice because I just SEO'd myself. I SEO'd the results of what's going on. And I'm not even very good at SEO anymore, but some of these things are so obscure, so specific that it's hard not to be. And so if you want something, think about, do a search for yourself, or look through your profile. Are you saying in your words, in your profile, what you actually want to be? And is that something that is reflected in what you do? It's sort of obvious, right? A lot of these tips are obvious, but they work. At least they work somewhat. I'm sure you can be better at it. And now finally, the last tip. This is number 11. We're going to call it a bonus tip. Don't be a douche. Hopefully, this is going back to number 8 about being myself. I use the word douche a lot. I'm sorry if you get offended by it. That's me. That's Jeff. And so if you get offended by it and you've listened to 44 episodes and I didn't use the word douche, and now you see it and you're like, oh, that's it. I'm done with Jeff. Then I'm sorry. I was not myself for those 44 episodes. But as I'm working through core values for Jeffalytics, this is going to be one of my core values for my company. So anybody who basically goes through this thing, and I have to talk to my wife, who's the lawyer, to make sure that I can do this without like being in trouble from a labor standpoint. But as I go through core values, one of them is going to be don't be a douche. And basically what I want to say is you can be successful without being completely self-unaware. So I call a douche as somebody who is completely self-unaware. They think of themselves only. They don't think about the implications of how they interact with people. They don't look at themselves from afar and see see the dumb things they're doing, see how stupid they look. And it's possible to run a company and to be successful without being self-unaware. And so I want to keep that going as much as I can. I do think that maybe self-awareness can be a limit because it ultimately leads to some form of self-consciousness. But I think that it is cool. You can keep it real and build a company and be successful and build a personal brand. You just need to make a conscious effort around it. Now, Trey Ratcliffe, the guy that I was talking about, he was self-aware. He was in the present. It was really cool. Like a lot of times when you meet somebody who's on top of the world, you're like, man, this person is like my idol, or they're so great at what they do. You meet them in person and it's disappointing. You're like, man, this person's a total douchebag. I can't believe that I like this person. And so a lot of times meeting somebody in person that I idolize or that I look up to, and when I see them in person, it sort of like tarnishes my feelings about them based on how they treat other people or how they act if they can't be present. But there are people who are successful who do it. Mark Cuban, Trey Ratcliffe, those are two that I can highly recommend as being people who will be there in the present. Doesn't mean they don't have their flaws, doesn't mean that I agree with everything they do, but I respect it because they are themselves and they are present. And so just see if you can get through life and do a good job without being completely self-unaware, or as I call it, being a D-bag. And if you got offended by that, please do let me know, and maybe I'll just like bleep that out or something. Then I'm not being myself. Okay, so that is it for this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Visit jeffalytics.com/brand for show notes. And if you did find it interesting, please leave a comment for me so that I know that I can create more Jeff-episodes. And if you have a question you want me to talk candidly about and you want me to answer, then you know how to reach me. Google Jeff, let it autocomplete to my plethora of websites, or at Jeffalytics or at Jeff Sauer on the Twitter or whatever. Like if you can't find me, then that's your problem. You're not very self-aware. Okay, cool. So hopefully I didn't lose too many fans on this episode, but I like doing these. And so, like I said, I'll probably carve this out into its own feed just for the people who want more Jeff. Then we'll do interviews on the traditional feed that you subscribe to. And I look forward to hearing your feedback. Talk soon.